Sutra of Relationship, the Law of Life. Respect life and living space. We protect our personal space, and respect the space of others. Nature created us as individual beings, giving us 2 legs, 2 hands, and a head so that we could pursue our own happiness. Each of us has a unique DNA code. If nature had intended otherwise, people would reproduce by budding or splitting. But we are separate beings, and each is entitled to their own personal space. To establish boundaries between our bodies, we wear clothing and develop rules of etiquette. It's not acceptable to push, touch someone's face, peek into others' windows, or read someone else's messages. We need free space, without interference, to create our own comfortable oasis, essential for personal growth. Personal square meters both literally and figuratively work like a greenhouse, creating a unique microclimate where rare flowers grow, not weeds as in open soil. No matter how actively the world tries to invade our greenhouse and our way of thinking through Instagram, Facebook, or endless messengers, we should protect it. Sometimes it's essential to set boundaries, turn off the phone, put away the bag, send the kids to their room. Learn to defend your right to arrange things in the way that makes sense to you because it reflects your internal order. There is a unique ecology in our personal space where everything is interconnected. What may seem like chaos to others is cosmic harmony to us. Each person builds their closest circle to their liking: friends, acquaintances, emotional connections. This is intimate. It's impolite to ask questions about it or give unsolicited advice. Snippets of messages or conversations taken out of context will inevitably be misunderstood, so it's best to set passwords. We should also give others the same right to protect their personal space. By maintaining distance, relationships become stronger. Separate closets, bathrooms, safes, careers, and social circles, all these strengthen the union. In any situation, a person retains the need for personal space, even those who deny it. Intuitively, even as children, we divide, this is mine, and beyond that, it's not mine. The phenomenon of personal space was first described by American anthropologist Edward Hall in the 1960s. Studying the functions, meanings, and characteristics of personal space, which a person always protects when interacting with others, he demonstrated that each of us tends to regard a certain area around our body as an extension of ourselves and is ready to defend it against outside intrusion. Researchers often represent personal space as a balloon that constantly changes its size, as some people are allowed closer, while others are kept at a distance. This allows us to regulate how open we are to others. A person has several zones of personal space. A great truth was revealed to me. I learned, people live. And the meaning of their life is in their home. The road, the barley field, the hillside speak differently to a stranger and to the one who was born there. Antoine de Saint-Exupéry. 1. The intimate, personal, zone is only 1545 cm and is meant for very few people, those close to us, whom we love, very good friends, and family members. 2. The friendly zone is for less close friends and acquaintances. It ranges from 45 cm to 1.2 meters. 3. The social zone spans 1.2 to 3.5 meters. It is for strangers or those we barely know and haven't yet established a relationship with. 4. The public zone is used for communicating with groups or public speaking, the widest zone 3.5 meters and more. If a person is deprived of the healthy use of personal space for an extended period, it causes immense stress, leading to a rapid increase in aggression and heightened levels of stress hormones. In such situations, the person requires urgent psychological and emotional relief, which affects their relationships and often leads to open conflict. People deprived of personal space tend to push others away, even physically, and expand their space to reduce stress. The need for personal space can largely be explained by the presence of each individual's biofield. When an outsider enters our personal space, it resists the intrusion, and we feel tension. In turn, the intruder's biofield also suffers from the negative reaction of our field. The significance of the psychological field, which creates our individual microclimate, was discussed by the founder of social psychology, Kurt Lewin. Our personal field undergoes changes due to the constant flow of various charges, positive and negative. If we are repeatedly exposed to situations where our psychological field is attacked by negative charges, it weakens and becomes perforated. This leads to fatigue, depression, apathy, and psychosomatic illnesses. Therefore, to preserve the integrity of our personal field, we shouldn't allow people and emotions that bring negativity to come too close. Conversely, by opening our boundaries to positive energy, everything that brings us pleasure, joy, and happiness, we nourish and strengthen ourselves. Even a dog deserves its own kennel. Even animals have personal space and the instinct to free themselves from stressors that invade their boundaries. In 1917, I.P. Pavlov and M.M. Ubergritz described an unconditional reflex where an animal tries to free itself when it encounters an obstacle. Pavlov called this reaction the freedom reflex. If the animal is unable to close off its boundaries from invasion, following its instinct for self-preservation, it resigns itself, and this manifests the reflex of slavery. Personal space and the desire to escape a stressor that invades boundaries exist even among animals. In 1917, I.P. Pavlov and M.M. Ubergritz described an unconditioned reflex, where an animal encountering an obstacle tries to free itself. Pavlov called this reaction the reflex of freedom. If the animal cannot block its boundaries from intrusion, it eventually submits to the instinct of self-preservation, manifesting the reflex of slavery. This reflex of freedom is demonstrated simply in laboratory conditions. The animal is physically restrained in one place. In response, it tries to break free and defend itself. This is the first stage of the freedom reflex. But after some time, the animal ceases its futile efforts, which only lead to exhaustion, and becomes still. This is the second stage of the unrealized reflex of freedom, the reflex of slavery. As the restriction of freedom continues, further adaptation of behavior naturally occurs, in both animals and humans, to circumstances they cannot change. Participation begins, marking the third stage of the freedom reflex. At this stage, not only does active inhibition of the freedom reflex occur, shown in submission and forced compliance to the inevitable, but there is also pathological adaptation to previously unacceptable conditions. This type of behavior, on the one hand, reinforces the pathological situation, but on the other, it may evolve into the fourth stage of the reflex liberation. If physical liberation from slavery does not occur, the organism finds freedom from pressure in another way by dying. Analogies can be drawn in the social sphere. For instance, a dictatorial boss might exhaust employees, controlling all their time and excessively invading their personal space. Initially, they resist, but the weaker ones eventually submit to the abuse and insults. The longer an employee remains in such a submissive state, the more profound the changes in their psyche, leading to degradation not only of their mental and emotional well-being but also their physical health. In any marriage, there are boundaries that must not be crossed. Once you cross that invisible line, say or do something you cannot take back, it's the end of the family. Ed McBain. According to the Canadian endocrinologist Hans Selye, the body's resistance is finite, so when the adrenal glands can no longer produce stress hormones, the resistance stage of stress turns into the exhaustion stage, eventually leading to death. The price of excessive or improper adaptation to the violation of personal space can be psychological and psychosomatic illnesses. For some, this constant insurmountable stress may result in a heart attack or cancer. The desire to separate personal space has existed at all stages of human development. In conditions where all members of the clan, tribe, or community lived in maximum openness, defining personal and private space was marked by various signs. For instance, among the Eskimos, a lasso placed over a tent served as a clear warning to anyone attempting to violate the personal space of someone engaging in intimate activity in the marked tent. The next step in limiting personal space among ancient peoples was the protection of the elite chieftains, kings, priests, shamans, and the nobility. The persons of priests, temples, and their property were strictly tabooed, considered not only sacred but also untouchable. Over time, such taboos on personal space extended to all members of the tribe and community, eventually becoming firm laws protecting personal space and property. Ancient laws harshly punished even the smallest encroachments on others' territory. In ancient Greece, these were the draconian laws, which prescribed severe punishments, including death, for minor violations of property and personal rights. In ancient Rome, it was the equally famous and harsh laws of the 12 Tables. There is a line in everything beyond which it is dangerous to go, for once you cross it, it is impossible to return. Fyodor Dostoevsky. A good player sees the boundary in any game. Oscar Wilde. The demand to respect others' boundaries was cultivated in Europe over centuries. Our freedom ends where another person's freedom begins. This famous phrase, which today represents a key democratic value, was uttered as early as the 13th century. It was attributed to a French deputy whose opponent in court, gesturing with his hands, touched the tip of his nose. Your freedom to wave your hands ends where another's nose begins. In the Anglo-Saxon legal system, the right to protect personal space was most fully realized. Attention to individual interests and protection from arbitrary authorities manifested in the Magna Carta, 1215, which established the principle of subjecting all authorities to the rule of law, including recognizing the right of the populace to armed resistance in case of violation of this principle. One significant step toward protecting the personal space of ordinary people in England was the legal establishment of the so-called Castle Doctrine, 1604, which defended the inviolability of the home from any unauthorized intrusion, including the right to defend it by force. Hence the famous expression, "My home is my castle." And finally, the long journey towards the protection of personal space in Anglo-Saxon law culminates in the famous Habeas Corpus Act of 1679. Habeas corpus, you may have the body intact, is a categorical demand for the legality of all procedural actions when detaining a suspect. One's own home, one's own space. One's corner, one's freedom. Habeas corpus, a formula that clearly defines the boundaries of personal space, which no one is allowed to violate, is often referenced in literature. Defending the interests of their clients, the heroes of detective novels by Chase, Stout, or Chandler frequently mention the sacred phrase, habeas corpus, and that alone is enough to curb the zeal of overly eager police officers. For example, the brilliant Nero Wolfe does this when he puts Commissioner Kramer in his place, who not only dares to violate the famous detective's personal space but also threatens him and his assistant Archie Goodwin. "You're a brazen liar," Kramer irritably declared to Wolfe. Wolfe's chin jerked upwards at least 8 inches. Mr. Kramer, he said coldly, I am tired of your visit. Mr. Goodwin did not throw you out when you first entered, so I suggest you leave on your own without waiting for an invitation. You know the limits of your rights and capabilities as well as I do. He pushed his chair back from the desk and stood up. If you claim that I'm lying, prove it. But if your actions continue as they have today when you burst into my home during dinner, I will lie to you day and night. And if you dared and I had the impression you intended to detain Goodwin as a witness, that's where you would truly learn the art of lying. And I would not seek his release on bail, no, I would hound you with the Habeas Corpus Act. You would immediately receive an order to bring the arrested person before a court to review the legality of his detention. The conclusion of this scene is quite predictable from the perspective of Anglo-Saxon practices of protecting personal space. The brave inspector retreated. In a society where the inviolability of the home, the protection of personal space, and life itself are inviolable laws, it could not have ended otherwise. And this applies not only within the norms of Anglo-Saxon law but in the entire civilized world. Today, we live in a world with open borders. Moving from one country to another, a traveler sometimes cannot tell whether they have crossed a boundary or not. But people and nations strive to preserve their identity, to emphasize their national characteristics. The general principle of human life as a social being implies the preservation even in the most totalitarian systems of a certain degree of individual freedom, a minimum minimorum, the absolute minimum, of personal space. Every person living on Earth is unique. One of the most active humanists of the 20th century, German philosopher and physician, Nobel Peace Prize laureate Albert Schweitzer, defined the main principle of ethics as reverence for life. This same principle is upheld by all the world's religions. In his addresses, the 14th Dalai Lama often touches on the issue of respecting others' lives. If we lack respect and compassion for others, even if we reach the highest peaks of wealth and knowledge, our lives cannot be called truly human. To live happily, causing the least harm to other living beings, is the life each of us is entitled to and is truly worth living. He also said, follow these three eternal rules: respect yourself, respect others, and take responsibility for your actions. Islamic jurist Abu Isa at-Tirmidhi wrote, a sign of a person's good observance of Islam is their avoidance of matters that do not concern them. Respecting the boundaries of personal space is part of Muslim etiquette, which urges believers to observe good manners and refrain from interfering in others' personal affairs. It will be enough harm for a person to despise their brother in Islam. For every Muslim, the life, blood, property, and honor of another Muslim are inviolable. A believer must respect the rights of others and avoid causing harm through words or actions. Only Allah knows what is good and what is harmful for a person. Islam even has a list of forbidden deeds, Quran 4:114, that violate personal space, revealing others' secrets, entering someone else's home without knocking, sharing the secrets of marital life with outsiders. Respect others and they will respect you. Know your boundaries in friendship as well. The Torah proclaims the brotherhood of all people and unconditional respect for the life of another. This idea rests on two foundations: the unity of human origin and human nature. First, every person, according to the Torah, descends from Adam and, after the flood, from Noah, meaning all people ultimately have common ancestors. Second, we all carry within us the image of God, the heavenly gene, the imprint of common sonship. Each person is born not only of parents but also of God. All people are children of God and therefore brothers, regardless of national, racial, or religious differences. Judaism places great importance on relationships of brotherhood and love. Both the Torah and the Talmud, as well as the commentaries of later Jewish sages and thinkers, recognize such relationships as the only ones truly worthy of a person created in the image of God. Love God and love your neighbor. These two inextricably linked commandments essentially sum up all of Judaism. However, brotherly relationships between people are not a fact but a task, a challenge for both individuals and humanity as a whole. The path to achieving this goal lies in respecting the life of another, a creation of God just like our own life. Christianity also speaks about respecting personal boundaries. The well-known commandment of Christ, love your neighbor as yourself, Matthew 22:37-40, instills in us respect for others' freedom and will. So in everything, do to others what you would have them do to you, Matthew 7:12. These gospel commandments teach us to see and respect the boundaries of others if we want to demand respect for our own boundaries. To have the ability to manage one's life and protect personal space from intrusion, one must likewise protect others' right to privacy. To exist as a person, one must be able to draw boundaries and say no. Iris Murdoch. The boundary between the few and the masses runs not between people but within each person. John Fowles. If we love and respect people who tell us no, they will, in turn, respect our no. Freedom begets freedom. Where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is freedom, 2 Corinthians 3:17. If we accept others' freedom, we ourselves feel free. Even in folklore and folk tales, this need for personal space, which gives us nourishment and a sense of security, is reflected. For example, this is touchingly illustrated in the Ossian tale The Man and the Hedgehog. A man once caught a hedgehog and placed him in a castle. There, the hedgehog was well taken care of, looked after, and treated with respect. The hedgehog lived in the castle for a significant time. Then one day, they asked him, "Well, hedgehog, how do you feel? Are you comfortable? What does your heart desire?" The hedgehog replied, "I need nothing except one thing, return me to my bush." Every person needs their own life space. Most of us equate this space with a comfort zone. For one, it's their home, for another, it's family, for a third, it's the embrace of a loved one. To live in harmony with oneself and interact productively with the outside world without attacking or surrendering, one must not only define their personal space and territory and know how to protect it but also respect the personal space of others. After all, personal space is a delicate matter, and violating it harms both oneself and others. He who respects others will be respected in return.